האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov and good evening, everyone. We're in the Zera Shimshon on Parsha Tzav. We're going to be doing Os Gimel, section number 3. Before we do, we're going to take a look at 2 psukim right from the beginning of the Parsha. This is Perek Vav in Sefer Vayikra, and we're going to read psukim Gimel and Dalet. What the Torah is talking about here is one of the first things that happens in the Mishkan, or that used to happen in the Mishkan, and then later on in the Beis HaMikdash, and that was that a Kohen would come in and go up the ramp to the Mizbeach and perform a mitzvah called Trumas Hadeshen, separating ash from the top of the Mizbeach, taking some ashes in a special container from the top of the Mizbeach. And then the Kohen would descend down the ramp and place those ashes on the side next to the where the Mizbeach was located. And we're going to also find out that at certain times, if a large amount of ashes accumulated on top of the Mizbeach and formed a kind of big pile right in the middle of the Mizbeach, that had to be taken away, and the excess ashes had to be removed to outside of the temple, outside of the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash area. So that's what these 2 psukim are talking about. V'lavash haKohen mido vad, and the Kohen would put on his linen tunic, his linen garment, u'michnasei vad yilbash al bisaro, and he would be wearing his linen pants on his flesh. And even though these are only 2 of the begodim, the special garments that a Kohen would wear, are mentioned here, actually he was required to put on all 4, but these are the only 2 mentioned. Veherim es hadeshen asher tochal ha'esh es ha'ola. And he would lift up from the ashes that the fire had consumed from the burnt offering that was on the altar. V'samo etzel hamizbeach, and he would place these ashes that he lifted and separated from the top of the mizbeach down next to the mizbeach. Next pasuk. Ufashat es bigodov v'lavash bigodim achirim. And as we mentioned, when so many ashes accumulated that the whole top of the Mizbeach, the big pile of ashes, had to be removed and taken away out to another place, then the Kohen would remove his regular garments that he was wearing to do the avoda, to do the service. He would take those off. V'lavash bigadim achirim, and he would put on other garments. And he would take the ashes to a special location outside of the camp, el makom tahor, to a place that was pure. It had to be ritually pure, and he would deposit all of the excess ashes there. So those are the 2 psukim. And now let's take a look at what the Zera Shimshon would like to share with us. He starts off with the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos. Shabbos Perek Tes Vav, Masechta Shabbos in the 15th chapter. Omar Rabbi Acha bar Abba, Omar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Acha bar Abba said, quoting Rabbi Yochanan, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, Minayin l'shinoi bigodim min Torah. From where do we know from the Torah that there is an obligation to change our clothing, meaning to put on more impressive, more expensive, more important garments, nicer clothing? Where do we know from the Torah that a person should do that for the purpose of serving Hashem? And Rashi there in the Gemara says, for example, when a person goes from the weekday preparation for Shabbos on a Friday to actually entering Shabbos, where do we know that there's a Torah obligation for that person to change out of their Friday clothing that they're wearing to get ready to do all the things they needed to do in the house to get ready for Shabbos, to then actually greeting the Shabbos and changing into their Shabbos clothing? Or Rashi says to put on special clothing for davening. Where do we know that from the Torah? So the Gemara answers, Shenemar, as the Torah states, and this next pasuk will be our pasuk. Ufashat es bigodov, it says he should remove his clothing. V'lovash bigodim acherim, and he should put on other clothing. Again, that pasuk referred to the Kohen who was doing the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash, and now was given the task of removing the ashes to a place outside of the Mishkan or outside of the Beis HaMikdash. That Kohen had to take off his, so to speak, service clothing, his uniform that he wore when he did the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash or the Mishkan, and put on other clothing to remove the ashes outside to a location outside of the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash. V'tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, and the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael taught, Limda Torah derech eretz. The Torah is teaching us appropriate, proper behavior here. Begodim shebisha bohem kedera l'rabo, the clothes that a person would wear when he prepares food for his master, al yimzog bohem kos l'rabo. He should not wear those clothing, that same clothing when he comes in to serve the master and pour a cup of wine for him. Ad Kahn, until here is the quote. So the teaching of the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael is that when just like a person in his own home would, and who's serving his Rebbe, just like or a servant serving a master, just like that person would never think to serve the master and pour a cup of wine for the master while wearing the same clothing that person wore when he was preparing the food and doing and certainly things that would get besmirched and dirty. Of course, that person would change clothing to come in and serve the master directly, not wear the same things that he or she was wearing when they prepared the food in the kitchen. So to here, a Kohen, we see, wears their special clothing when they are performing the avodah, the service in the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash, but then change into a lower level of clothing, and we'll learn much more about that. But they change into different clothing to leave the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash and take the ashes out away from that location. Next paragraph, Ra'isi Makshin. The Zera Shimshon says, I have seen people who ask the following questions. We're going to see two questions. Ma tzorech ledavar zeh ra'oya min haTorah. What need is there for this teaching to have a proof from the Torah? Im haderech eret v'hasvara nosenes kach. If the normal ways of respectful, proper behavior and the svara and the normal logic that people have, no senes kach, would already give us this idea. If these are things, in other words, that are intuitive, if it's intuitive and obvious to everyone, and this is part of basic politeness and courtesy, to change clothing before coming in to serve the master and put on nicer clothing, why do we need a proof from the Torah? That's question one. V'gam ha'Ian Yaakov, and also in the commentary called Ian Yaakov, Hirgish, he felt that there was a problem here. De'ein zo ra'oyu gemura, that this proof that the Gemara brings is not a complete proof. It's deficient in some way. Mishum diyesh lomar, because we could say, Kedushas Kehuna Legavoha Shiny. We could say that the holiness and the sanctity involved of serving Hashem in the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash makes the laws different. Meaning, perhaps the fact that a Kohen had to wear different clothing for the process of the mitzvah, doing the mitzvah of taking out the ashes to an off-site location, and then the clothing that Kohen had to wear when serving in the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash doesn't really teach us anything about how we should behave when we go to davening, perhaps, or when we accept Shabbos, because perhaps the changing of clothes in the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash by the Kohanim involves totally separate laws and laws that only apply to the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. And we really shouldn't learn from them. We really can't necessarily learn from them and apply them to our situation, which of course is not connected to service in the Beis HaMikdash or the Mishkan. So that's the second question, and that's the question of the Ian Yaakov. So those are the two questions that the Zera Shimshon says he read about. Next paragraph. V'la'anios dati, according to the humbleness of my own thinking, the Zera Shimshon says, ein kon lo kusha v'lo hargosha. There is no real difficulty here, and there's no real feeling of a problem. And here, the Zera Shimshon, of course, is referring to the fact that he called the first issue a question, and he referred to the second question as a hargasha, something that the Iyun Yaakov felt was a little difficult. And so he says, there's no problem here. The first question is not a question. And the difficult feeling that the Iyun Yaakov expressed or articulated is also not a problem. These two things do not present real problems, the Zera Shimshon says. Mishum, because the Beperik Beis de Yoma, because in the second chapter of Maseches Yoma, Makish begodim shalovesh, the Gemara compares the clothing that a Kohen puts on to take the ashes out of the Mishkan or Beis HaMikdash and bring them away, lebegodim sheposhe, to the clothing that the Kohen was wearing and had to remove, was wearing when he did the service in the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash and had to remove before taking out the ashes to an off-site location. So the Gemara draws a comparison between those two sets of clothing. Ma lehalon bigdei kodesh, just like over there regarding the clothing that the Kohen was wearing when he did the avoda, when he did the service, and he had to remove them before leaving to take out the ashes, just like those clothing, those articles of clothing were bigdei kodesh, were the holy garments that a Kohen was obligated to wear during his service. Afkan, so too over here, meaning so too when the Kohen leaves the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash to take out the ashes, bigdei kodesh, those should also be holy garments, the four special holy garments that a Kohen would wear. So this, of course, is a very important point and a very important teaching because it tells us something that we would not have known, and that is that whether or not a Kohen that just like a Kohen who is serving in the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash has to wear his bigdei kodesh, his four special articles of holy clothing, so too the Kohen who leaves the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash with the excess ashes and takes them out, leaves the area and goes to a different location to put down the ashes and deposit them there, that Kohen also has to wear the four special holy garments that Kohanim wear. So the Gemara continues, Im kain ma talmud lomar acherim. If so, meaning if the Kohen, whether or not he's serving in the Mishkan or Beis HaMikdash or is taking out ashes, is going to be wearing his four special holy garments, Ma Talmud Lomar Acherim. What did the Torah teach us when it said that the Kohen changes into bigadim acherim, into other clothing? He doesn't seem to be changing into other clothing. He's still wearing the four garments that a Kohen is obligated to wear when he performs the service. So the Gemara answers, Pechusim mehem. He wears garments of lesser quality. For example, if a Kohen starts off in his service of the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash a Kohen does start off his service with beautiful, brand new bigdei kodesh, bigdei kahuna, four new beautiful holy garments to perform the service. After a certain amount of time, those garments become worn, and become perhaps a little bit tattered. And at that point, the Kohen is given a new set of bigdei kahuna, of the four special garments that he needs to wear when he does the service in the Beis HaMikdash. But he keeps the first set as well, the older set, the worn set, Why? Because when he leaves the Mishkan or Beis Hamikdash with to do the mitzvah of taking out the ashes, he then can switch into the worn Bigdei Kahuna, the older Bigdei Kahuna, which are considered somewhat pechusim, somewhat inferior to the newer set that he's wearing when he works in the Beis Hamikdash. But, however, the key point here, the critical point is, he still has to wear Bigdei Kahuna even when he's taking out the ashes. However, the ones that he switches into, the Bigadim Acherim, the other garments, are these slightly worn, are used Bigdei Kahuna that he doesn't wear when he serves in the Mishkan or Beis Hamikdash. Kidetana debe Rabbi Yishmael, and here the Gemara in Yoma brings in our teaching of Rabbi Yishmael. Begodim shebishel behen kedera, the clothing that a person wears when he cooks in the kitchen, a dish for his master, v'chule, etc. Those same clothing the person should not wear when they serve the master directly. So the Zera Shimshon, based on this Gemara in Maseches Yoma, is going to show us now how we have a new perspective on what the Gemara and Shabbos was teaching us, and what the whole teaching of Debei Rabbi Yishmael is all about. And in so doing, he'll answer his two questions. Umeata, next paragraph, and from now, Hoil shehuchra hakosov lomar, since the pasuk had to teach us sheyiyu bigdei kodesh, that the clothing that was worn, even to take out the ashes, had to be holy garments that a Kohen wears when he is serving during his time of service in the Mishkan or Beis Hamikdash. Even when he takes out the ashes, he has to wear those clothing. V'lo bigdei chol, and he is not allowed to change into weekday clothing to take out the ashes, right? And that's the big Kiddush, you might say. That's the new point that we're discovering here based on the Gemara Maseches Yoma. You might think that the job of taking out all these ashes and dealing with that and bringing it out to the countryside somewhere to deposit it, he's going to get messy, he's going to get dirty. And so, of course, he should change into his regular non-Kohanic clothing. No, he cannot wear Bigdei Chol. He cannot wear his weekday clothing. He must still wear his Bigdei Kodesh, his special Bigdei Kahuna. And that's what we're seeing. Afilu lehotzas hadeshen, even to take out the ashes, hatzavor batapuach, that have gathered and been piled up in the apple. The apple was the term given to ashes that were piling up and making a big apple-shaped pile on top of the Mizbeach. So just as an aside, it's important to understand that there was the daily Trumas Adeshin, and that didn't involve this tapuach, this big pile of excess ashes. That just involved whatever ashes were normally on top of the Mizbeach from the burning of the previous day's korbanos. The Kohen would go up in the morning, first thing in the morning, and he would remove some of those ashes and put that next to the Mizbeach. That's one service. What we're talking about here is going up when there's a tremendous amount of excess ashes that have built up on the Mizbeach and form almost what looks like a giant apple. Some people call it the big apple on top of the Mizbeach of ashes, and remove those ashes and take them out. That is what we're referring to, and that's where the Kohen, we're learning, has to wear Bigdei Kahuna, special holy garments, and can't change into weekday clothing. Also here, to do this job, he has to wear his holy garments. The Torah is requiring him to wear his holy garments. Va'afilu hachi, and even so, gezeras hakosav he, it is a law or a decree of the Torah, sheyiyu pechusim meharishonim, that they should be of less stature, they should be inferior to the first set of garments that the Kohen was wearing when he was performing his avodah, his service in the Mishkan or in the Beis HaMikdash. So the Zera Shimshon is saying that the important thing that we need to realize that kind of changes our perspective about everything here and helps us answer the two questions in the beginning is that the Torah is not saying that a Kohen should switch from his holy big day kahuna to his weekday clothing when he takes out the ashes. That we would understand intuitively. That we really would know without any special teaching. What we need, what we're learning here from the Torah, and we only would know it from the Torah teaching it as kind of a gezeras hakos, of a decree from the Torah itself. We wouldn't know it logically. We wouldn't know it intuitively. Is that even when the Kohen takes out the ashes, he has to wear big day kahuna, but those big day kahuna have to be an old worn set, and they have to be pechusim, they have to be inferior to his other set of big day kodesh, of holy kohanic garments that he wears when he does the avoda. And that's something that we would not have been able to figure out. That's something that the Gemara in Yoma, that the Zera Shimshon brought in, taught as a chidush, as a new idea to us. Umay detana Rabbi Yishmael, and this teaching of the yeshiva Rabbi Yishmael, derech eretz begodim shebishabahem, about the proper etiquette of not wearing the same clothing when you're cooking in the kitchen to the clothing that you serve in. Itzterich kedei lefarish taima dekra. That is necessary to explain the reasoning behind the what the pasuk is teaching about the changing of the garments. Aval ikar kra itzterich legufe. But the main teaching of the pasuk is needed for itself. Lomar, to say sheyiu big day kodesh dafka, that even the clothing for taking out the ashes also have to be big day kodesh. So the Zera Shimshon here is demonstrating to us that in the very beginning, when he asked the first question about, isn't this obvious? Couldn't we have figured out, why do we need a Torah teaching? He's answering and saying the reason you need a Torah teaching is because the Torah is teaching us here something that in fact is a novel idea and is not something that we would have figured out on our own. We would have known on our own that a Kohen could wear old weekday jeans, so to speak, big day chol, weekday clothing to take out the ashes, but of course couldn't wear and shouldn't wear those clothing to come into the Mishkan or Beis HaMikdash and do the avoda. That we certainly could have figured out on our own, but that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is that a Kohen who is already wearing big day kodesh, holy clothing to do the service in the avoda in the Mishkan Beis HaMikdash, must change out of those into another set of big day kahuna and another set of holy kohanic garments, and put that on and wear them, is required to wear them when taking out the ashes, a menial type of job, a very dirty type of job, but nonetheless he wears them. And that transition, the going from two different types of big day kahuna, the newer, nicer set, and the versus the older, more worn set, we would not have known on our own, and would not have figured out from our own svara, from our own reasoning. So that answers question one. Umeata, and from now that we understand what's really going on here, in hachinami, we can concede she'im lo haya omer hakosav acherim, if the Torah had not said other clothing, that the Kohen has to change into other clothing when he takes out the ashes, demashma pechusim, which implies inferior clothing, lo hayinu omrim kein mikoach hasvara v'haderech eretz. We would not have said this from the power of our own logic and our own ideas about courtesy. Hoil shehikpid hakosev shiyu bigdei kodesh dafka, since the Torah specified and was careful to say that even when he does the dirty job, so to speak, he has to wear bigdei kodesh, he has to wear the clothing of the Kohen, of the bigdei kahuna, of the clothing that a Kohen has to wear. So without coming right out and saying it explicitly, what the Zera Shimshon is doing is also responding to the question of the Iyun Yaakov about this. This is not a real solid proof, because what happens in the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash can't really be compared to things that we do in our own daily lives that aren't connected to the service of the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. And the Zera Shimshon says that is not accurate. That's not a problem. if the Torah was telling us that the Kohen has to change from his big day kahuna, his Kohanic garments, to big day chol, to weekday garments, then you could make that point and say, well, obviously he's changing everything in order to go do the service in the Mishkan and Beis HaMikdash, and that's a whole different idea. That's a whole different set of laws. But since the Torah is not saying that, and the Torah is saying that the Kohen is going to be wearing big day kahuna and big day kodesh, the holy clothing of the Kohanim, in both circumstances, when he works in the Beis HaMikdash and when he takes out the ashes, once it says that, then we can say, okay, yes, that's a higher standard of sanctity, but he's still wearing big day kahuna, and the Torah is insisting that he wear big day kahuna of a lower quality for one type of job and a higher quality when he comes into the Mishkan Beis HaMikdash. That is absolutely comparable to us, just like, to use the Rashi on the first in the Gemara and Shabbos example, just like when we wear clothing to prepare and do all the cooking and preparations to get the house clean for Shabbos, and then we change into our Shabbos clothing to actually greet the Shabbos and do our type of avoda on Shabbos, or our type of avoda in the shul for davening, to use Rashi's second example. Then we can make those comparisons according to the Zera Shimshon. So what we've seen here, just to briefly recap, is that sometimes it's easy for us to think that the idea of changing clothing, especially if it might come at a difficult time or a hard time, we might think to ourselves, really? Do I really have to change into special clothing for the whole Shabbos and wear my Shabbos clothing all Shabbos? Or what about a Yontif? Or what about a 3-day Yontif? All the time during a 3-day Yontif, as we have coming up, I have to wear special Yontif clothing. Is that really from the Torah, or is that a minhag? What is that? So this Zera Shimshon teaches us that is an idea that we see in the Torah itself, and that is extrapolated and learned out from the Torah and from specifically Parsha's Tzav, our Parsha of this week. Yasher koach to everyone for joining us for this week's section in the Zera Shimshon, and we look forward to learning again in the Zera Shimshon, God willing, next week.